but you have a gas tank, and then there's a line that runs out of that, and it has fuel in it, and it's flammable. I'm like, I would have had a fire going that they would have seen in DC. So we're bebopping right along. I'm like, man, these guys are full of shit. No problem. And then we hit the, pick up sticks in the bubblegum forest. I'm talking tree over tree over tree.
And it's a collection of indie filmmakers. Some of them are much better looking than other ones. Come on, get a piece of this.
Down, when we sneak in, because we're thinking they're going to still be bedded in this one area, nothing, right? Houdini, Kaiser Sourcey, they're gone. I'm like, well, fudge. Generally, panic is what kills you in a survival situation. And I always use the analogy of my wife wants she wants a gun that'll shoot down trees, that doesn't make noise and doesn't kick. And they just don't have that.
Come on, Charlie. Tell us how you're doing it. Come on, man. How are you calling in those bulls?
I can't do it, dude. Yeti, bloody Yeti.
Cut sleeve shirt, is that like a wife beater?
No, not quite.
Is it just you cut the sleeves off?
It's more redneck instead of white trash. So the
someday I hope to be a redneck.
The sleeves are just...
Hello, alright. You're listening to the Gritty Bowmen, home of gritty bow hunting films, interviews, tall tales, and a wee bit of manly boasting.
I'm South Cox, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowmen.
Hey, this is Corey Jacobson, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowmen.
We bone and raised outdoors, and you've been listening to The Gritty Bowmen.
There you go.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Jordan.
And you're watching
The Gritty Bowmen.
I always forget because it's 9 o'clock my time.
Yeah.
It's your day's slipping away. All right, folks. Welcome to the Gritty Bowman podcast. Aaron, dude.
I thought I had it on silent, man. It's because I turned my Bluetooth off.
We're back with Aron Snyder. We had some technical difficulties, but we charged through them. We broke through. So here we are. We are going to talk today about the rest of the story with Phil's sheep hunt. I want to hear it. We're going to release that other podcast today with the first half of this. So folks will probably want to hear how it ended because he got himself a nice sheep, and you have some gorgeous photographs from that trip. So people haven't seen those photographs. If they just listened to the last podcast, they should go back and watch it because it's got some pretty killer photos. Dude, you're really talented with the camera. It's ridiculous.
For a redneck from Oregon.
That's
not
right.
Too bad. I'm learning.
So tell me, how'd the trip go?
Oh, it was interesting. Well, the one thing Brian and I are very goal oriented.
Yes.
And I talk too damn much. So we have a 30-minute goal to talk about the sheep hunt. So we'll see how this goes. It's 10:06 my time, 9:06 your time.
Yes.
And we're off. So, well, the last a few things changed from the last trip to this one. The last one we got dropped off up top, and when I say up top, 13.3 is I think 13,300 feet, and then you do have to drop some altitude, do some climbing. But this time we parked at the bottom, and it turned up to be like an epic show. So I had made this route off of Google Earth and a map. And for those of you asking about Google Earth, for me to give some advice on it after this last trip, it probably shouldn't be me because it didn't work out like I planned it. But, we went up a trail for a ways, not very far, and then we cut off the trail and bushwhacked it. Now, I was told by a couple guys, probably the only two people on the planet that have even went this way, that I should do this, go this way. And I'm like, well, I don't want to walk right up that basin. We're tough. I'll cut before the basin, follow the ridge line up, and then parallel the basin 1,000 feet above it because I'm so smart and see the animals in the basin. Well, I tell you what, that was bad. It got to a point.
So Aaron, the sheep guide, really wasn't that good of a guide.
Oh, shoot, man. I mean, the plan worked great. It
Yeah.
just was a lot more difficult than we had anticipated, and we didn't hit the water that we were hoping to hit. And it got to a point where we'd been walking about 6 hours. That's with breaks, so not walking the whole time. Now, this is about roughly 6 miles in, and you gain, well, you're at 78 5,000 feet in elevation and so about 1,000 feet a mile.
Yeah.
It's pretty steep. So somewhere in the deadfall timber, we can see where I was supposed to end up right before tree line, maybe like 11,000 feet or a little bit lower than that. We can see where we're supposed to end up. I had shot above it, and I knew I was above it, but I didn't realize I was going to come above it and it would be a cliff down to it. I thought if I shot a little bit above it, we would just side hill into the basin. That didn't work either. We ended up in cliffs. And so then we have like this big, one of those moments of clarity of, if we go straight to the top, we don't have any water. So we have to drop altitude. So we kind of picked the lesser of two evils and side hilled the basin, not losing too much altitude and also gaining distance up the basin rather than just dropping straight down.
Yeah.
We when we stopped finally walking, we were at 11.8 and we ended up camping at 11.4. So we only lost about 400 feet. So we got in the basin and we set up camp for that night, and we went to sleep immediately. Well, Phil did. I got up in the middle because I only can sleep for about 4 hours at a time, it seems like. So I got up. We went to bed at like 8. So I got up at midnight, and might have been 9. But I took some night photos and trying to stay motivated. I got up again at about 4 and started stretching, which helped a lot. Because, in that climb in, we basically went in with an Nalgene bottle of water.
Mm-hmm.
We found a spring, which I posted a photo with my phone on Facebook of this. We just aimlessly wandered into, and I'm like, oh Lord, that's because there was no other water. So we filled up the Nalgene's then, and we were both in good moods. But right before we started that descent, side hill, Phil's legs started to cramp up, I always call it the hand of God, because you can just feel your like a hand is grabbing your muscle twitching. And then basically just camped that night, set up the tarps, and stretched, ate like a horse. I think we both had 2 things of ramen, 2 things of tuna, and I don't know how much other food. And then the next morning we had to go vertical. I mean, literally 50-degree slope, hands and knees. Like, it was crazy. Got to the top, no sheep, which we didn't think they'd be right there. We're following this ridge line at about 12.5, glassing into these basins. This is the very condensed version because of the timeline. So we up and down, rolling, almost it is a kind of a rolling hill, but it's a rolling hill at 12.5.
Yeah.
So long story short, we end up at the summit of the mountain we wanted to hunt, and we couldn't find any sheep. And we sat down basically like they've got to be somewhere around the perimeter of this mountaintop.
Yep.
And there's basins, fingers all the way around. I'm like, hey, Phil, I'm going to go forward and glass off the west side and see if I can see it because it's terraced. So I get up there and I'm like, wow, there could be sheep everywhere and anywhere in here. I'll go back, tell Phil, hey, I'm going to go up 150 yards and I'll kind of watch this section and see if I see him.
So how close is this to the other place you were hunting? Is this a
1.5 mile straight line distance.
Okay, so this is a completely different area.
This is where I saw the big ram where we were hunting last time.
Yep.
This was the mountain that we could see from where we were hunting. There was a ridge line, a rough knife edge ridge going to this mountain from where we were, but we never hunted it. So we could see all the places we had hunted while we were on this new mountain.
Okay.
But if we saw sheep in the direction, in the area we had just hunted, it would have been we could have gotten there, but it would have sucked. But we could have definitely hunted both spots.
Okay. But why did you go into this area instead?
Where that big ram.
Okay, so you've scouted out. You knew there was a big ram over on that side, so you went up there instead.
Well, yeah. While we were hunting the first trip, I spotted a ram on this mountain. We had just figured maybe 180. Same ram or high 180s. same ram we'd been looking for. The first trip we went in, we'd heard about it. A few guys knew about it. And I'm like, we went in from the bottom, right? Well, the thing is we were, hiking in. This was the last trip I was able to go with Phil and help him. And I don't know that he would have been able to. I mean, he talked about, Phil's a very busy guy. He owns his own business, his own archery range. Right. He does a podcast, so on and so forth. So it's getting to the nitty gritty. So we've got like 7 days of gear and prepared to basically kill ourselves to get this sheep because we can't go back.
Right.
So this is, basically the first day, not the first, we hiked in on whatever day it was, Wednesday. And this is Thursday around 11 o'clock, maybe noon of the portion of the story now where I go forward, I look for sheep. I'm like, wow, this looks good. So I go back to Phil and I get the, hey, get your fat ass down symbol. He had seen sheep. So I'm like, oh, so I low crawl up. I'm like, what's up? And he could see sheep or a sheep. Yep. And I got the binos up and I'm like, man, I can't tell if that's a ram or not. It's a long enough distance. I'm like, let me get out the spotter. So I go to pull the spotting scope out and the ram disappeared before I could look at it, but feels like it was a ram. I'm sure of it. So I'm like, oh, okay. I said, well, my first thought was let's sit here and see what pops up. And Phil's like, you know what? I'm just going to haul butt over there and see what I can see. And I was like, no. I said, well, be careful in the cliffs or whatever, just because they could be anywhere. So I just popped the spotter up, get some food out, throw a dip in. I've got 4G. I'm Facebooking it up. Phil gets there in like 5 minutes. I was like, wow, he was moving, right? I'm like, okay, well, he's there. I better, quit screwing around, right? So I'm on the eyepiece and I'm like, oh, there's a ram. Oh, there's Phil and a ram. And they're both, I'm guessing maybe 80 yards apart. Looks like 5 feet in the spotter.
Yep.
But the ram's got him pegged.
Yep. And
so he just has his head down. Well, the ram lays down, head down, sleeping, lays down. And I'm like, well, that's good. I guess it didn't pick him out. And I literally, Phil was wearing cryptic, and that stuff up high is ridiculous. And so, not a sales pitch. Hell, I had on first slide. I'm just saying it is hard to see someone in cryptic in those rocks. Well, that ram bedded down. Phil climbed like cliffhanger climbed, and he gets, and I'm talking like rock climbed, like I thought he was going to fall. He gets up there, and I'm like, well, there's 2 more rams jump out, banana heads, and they're jumping out on the cliffs and around, and they keep looking down, and they're looking up, and they're looking down. I'm like, well, man, from what I'm seeing from these rams, they're looking up at Phil and looking down at more rams. There's obviously, they're waiting for probably the dominant breeder or the lead ram to see what he's going to do. And so I lose Phil. He's like on this pedestal, like this cliff edge. It's about this wide. And I'm like, man, that's like straight down. Like his shot's going to be literally this vertical. And
and how, is this a fall to your death?
Oh yeah, that fall would have been to your death. He would have been retarded if he did. He would have wished he had died. That was like probably 30 feet straight down. It was a bad.
That's legit, dude. That's a little scary. That's the thing with sheep hunting is.
Oh, I can tell you that was nothing compared to what we climbed up. Like that was mild compared to, because he didn't have a pack on, man. We were climbing that with packs on. So anyway, he goes to full draw and wait, he didn't go to full draw. He did go to full draw, but I couldn't hear him go or see him go to full draw. His bow went off and I thought I heard a bow go off and I can see sheep running. And I'm like, whoa, something's happening, right? So I posted on Facebook. I'm like, I think he just shot. Yeah. And I can see rams running, and I saw one good ram come out of there. It was 8.5 years old. I'm like, well, if he shot one bigger than that, we're doing okay. Because I knew he had told me, he said, man, if it gets bad enough that, he would shoot like a 5/8 curl ram if he needed to, but he was going to try and, half curl's legal.
So Aaron, Phil's a resident of Colorado. He drew this archery tag for this unit. Is this like a points unit or
12 or 15 years is what it took
to draw this tag?
No, it took 12 years, and it can take up to 20. This tag's relatively easy to draw because of the terrain, and there's not overly large amount of large sheep. You don't see a lot of big sheep in this area. I mean, we found some big ones, and our buddy killed one,
It's
and there was
basically
big.
not a super desirable hunt for the average
This is
guy.
not an area that out of state people would say, "Oh, I drew Colorado. I want to go to this unit," or "I bought the governor's tag." Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, it about kills you getting into it. So,
right.
but a mature ram,
And this is
but when
archery.
archery.
This
That's
is not
correct.
rifle.
No, if it was rifle, we would have been done the first 5 minutes on the first day.
Yeah.
Because they hang out in those cliffs. Well, it's easy to tap one in a cliff. Climbing down a cliff and shooting with a bow is a little bit different.
Yep. So he had to shoot almost straight down on this ram.
Right. And I mean, to give you an idea, our goal, or I had talked with Phil, I'm like, look, an 8.5-year-old ram is very respectable. That's a mature ram. And I said, really, anything over 7.5 is a shooter. So, I'd explained to him some scoring stuff. So he, that doesn't mean he was going to shoot that. I was just like, dude, you get an 8.5-year-old ram from you better shoot that thing.
Dude, in those cliffs with a bow and arrow.
We'll give you an idea. He cut 12 yards off in a 45-yard shot. So when he shot, like, I grabbed my stuff. I went down there.
Okay, wait.
I saw him. Sorry.
How did he calculate the angle and the yardage?
Well, he did it. He took it off of bow mode, but I'll get to that in a sec, because I got over there and I'm looking up. I'm like, how much did you cut off for that shot, dude? So because when I came down, he had come back and grabbed his pack for the stock. He dropped it. Well, I got slightly discombobulated when I was going down there, and I ended up in the cliffs, and I'm like, man, this isn't right. And I looked down, and there's Phil, and I'm like, holy, is this where you shot it from? He's like, yeah, you got to do this. So I traversed my way down, and then there's the ram, and he said it was decent, yelling to me. It was decent. I got up there, and I was like, well, that's an 8.5-year-old ram. That's a good ram. Yeah. And it was broomed on one side. It didn't have a ton of length. And I'm like, dude, that's for this unit. And I was, not like making excuses, but he's got a wife that's pissed, 2 kids, 3 businesses,
right,
a podcast, and really only one buddy that could probably not just physically make it, because Braden made it fine, but also to take the time off of work. And I knew that area really good. I've hunted it before. So anyway,
he'd have been better off if he just spent $400,000 and got dropped in BC somewhere and just shot one.
Probably, yeah. I mean, or bought the Montana governor's tag for $350,000 to $450,000.
Yeah.
But I look up, I'm like, dude, how far was that? And he has a cut chart on his forearm, because the bow mode kind of screwed him last time.
Right.
And he cut 12 yards or 11 yards off, and he should have cut 13, or he cut 12 and he should have cut 14. But either way, he shot it for 35 yards. He basically pinwheeled it. That thing only ran like 20, 25 yards, and that was the end of it. So we get up there and we took a bunch of photos. Well, then, any one of these events happening by themselves isn't that bad. Like hiking in, yeah, it sucks, but you can take a day to recover. Climbing up and down the rolling hills at 13,000 feet. Well, so he shoots this, and we take pictures, skin it out, get the meat off. So there's no trees there. So I climb up a cliff and tie a rope around, and we hang the meat and the head from a cliff. And which I got a couple photos of that'll be on this podcast probably. So then I head up. I'm like, this really sucks bad, because we have to go about 1,200 feet back up over another 600-800 feet back down to our camp, get our camp, come back up and over. So what we did is we hung the meat up, we went up and over, went to camp, had a huge lightning storm, like cloud to ground, cloud to cloud, just lighting up the world. Never rained on us, right? Just barely sprinkled, like barely. Well, I go back, a marmot took my flipping spoon. So Phil's got a broken fork, and I had been like climbing this 1,200 feet straight up, thinking of top ramen the whole time. So Phil gives me his broken fork. We double up on ramen and tuna. It's like 1,200, 1,400 calories. I'm still hungry. That's like in and out, and I'm like, I might as well eat everything, because we have to hike down tomorrow. So we had some more food, got up in the morning, went back to the sheep.
Yeah.
And I'm planning the route out now. Like, we looked at the map that night, and then we get to where I'm looking at this valley, and I'm like, well, it's about a 37 to 45 degree slope coming down for maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles. and then we hit a fairly steep slope, but a creek bottom. And if we follow that creek out, that just leaves us basically almost to home, and then we'll be 3/4 of a mile from the truck. Once we get kind of to this certain specific point, we just bust a right, go up and over a little bit, and boom, we're at the truck. Seemed simple at the time. Well, man, that stuff was steep. Oh, so we're going and going this huge, like giant grassy chute, and we get into willows, just thick as can be. We go through those for a while. Then we hit the Pinch Point Creek section with deadfall timber. We go through that, but I'm on deer tracks the whole time. And I'm like, if deer, they're going to take the path of least resistance coming up here. So however long, 3.5, 4 hours later, we're getting pretty low. I'm starting to cramp up, just physical exertion. I mean, my pack was about 120. Phil's is probably 110. And, smile on our faces, everything's fine. And I'm like, okay, my feet hurt, the bottoms of them, hot spots, right? Not because of my boots, just that's how Phil's are killing him too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, okay, I've got about 3 hours in me left of doing this type of exercise with this much weight before I just have to really set up camp and sleep for a while. Yeah, stay the night, which isn't a horrible, there's no honor in ignorance, right? I mean, you just stop and say piss on it. Well, then we come through, then we hit the portion of the trip which was like head high briar bushes and weeds, and it was like we know we're almost there at that time. We get through that, and there's this huge open like space, just like it showed on the map.
Yeah.
Like, man, we get all excited. So we stop, we drink some water, man, we go 100 more yards, not cactus. There's cactus all over at this point. You go through 4 ecosystems coming out of there. We started the morning like 12:08 or 9. We finished up at 7,800 feet. So we get far enough down. I'm like, dude, I've got my GPS on. I'm like, we got to bust a right or we're going to pass the truck. We have got to start heading northwest or we're not going to make it.
So I wanted to ask you, going downhill with a backpack and a heavy load is a lot different than going uphill. Like uses completely different muscles, and I found that a lot of guys will exercise for climbing.
Yeah.
But it's descending. Like they just don't exercise descent and their knees are killing them and they're, coming down a hill. I've had a lot of buddies who just their feet are killing them. It's a totally different ball game.
Well, and we'll talk about in a different podcast a little bit with footwear, but Phil learned real quick that you want your boot size a half to 1 full size bigger than what it should be because you'll get black toe. And my boots fit correctly, and I still, one of my toes turned a little bit black from that, 120-pound load plus my body. I'm creeping. I mean, I'm at 320 coming down.
Yep.
And so we get to the bottom though, and I mean our feet are done, and I mean my feet were pretty. Like when I sat there, I couldn't hardly sit. They were burned so bad, so I'd untie them real quick, kind of let them air out, and common sense stuff, It's not a race, so. Well, I'm like, I can make it a solid 3 hours, right? I'm like, I'm good. So, man, we come out of the trees, and holy mother of pearl, it was like 104 degrees. We were in an ecothermal corridor, and I'm like, damn, that went to like an hour and a half real quick. Like, and we don't have much water. We filled up our Nalgene, at the creek when we busted off of it. But I'm drinking a now. I mean, I'm pissing sweat so much, like my shoulder straps. Well, Ryan Callahan from First Light's partner, he had his pack stolen out of his truck. So that poor bastard, I shipped him this one when I got back. I'm like, it's just white, the shoulder straps from my sweat. It's just, and Phil sweats like crazy too. So I'm out of that Nalgene quicker than I probably should have been. So, but man, it was like up and down. And whatever, land navigation, I ended up right above the truck, but it was a flipping cliff, like straight down. And I'm like, oh, shiznizzle. My feet can't, I can't do this. So I took my pack off and just drug that bastard behind me going down. And, cause I didn't want it to roll and, mostly cause, I didn't know when it stopped. So I'm just dragging it on my butt and I can hear Phil laughing. I'm like, oh yeah, laugh now, cry later. So then he's on his ass shortly after dragging his pack, and we get to the water, and I'm like, all right, I'm going beast mode. I'm almost to the truck. So I just put my head down and I plowed into the creek, and I'm like rinsing my face off, getting the pine needles off me. And Phil comes over with his head down with this shit-eating grin on his face. Like, we made it. And he kind of drops down to his knees and he rinses his face off and he gets some water. And I'm like, okay. So we get to the truck, and he's got a big, company truck. I mean, it's his own personal, but it's got, I didn't even know they made this, air-conditioned seats. So he's pushing buttons. He's like, dude, we're good. So I stripped down, I put some shorts and a t-shirt on, and you look back up, you can just see where you came from.
Yeah.
Right? And it looks, for most people, you look at that and it looks unworldly, like impossible.
Yeah.
And we were talking about,
especially with a 110, 20-pound pack.
well, and I knew what we were getting into because I've done that many times, and I'm like, I'm always like positive in a good mood, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, it's going to take a few days to recover from this one. And it was worse than I thought. So we got into town, and the first little crappy town we hit, sure as could be, there's some guys that are sheep hunters, and we weren't trying to make a scene of it. Like, I was trying to get the hell out of there. I didn't want to tell any stories. I'm limping around like I just got cornholed, right? It's my legs are sore. And so we grabbed some ice, and we're packing it, and they're like, the one dude's like 60, and he's like, oh yeah, I've been putting in that tag forever. And I'm like, are you gonna hunt up there? And Phil's like, man, I wouldn't do it. And well, I'm hard-headed, and I'm like, man, you might want to find some, because even with horses, you've got the climb. I mean, you still got a climb.
Yeah.
So yeah, either way, that's the oh, look at that, we're gonna make it. Dude. That was the condensed version. The one thing I would say was the first trip we brought bivvies and tarps, knowing that we generally are cliffed out in there. You're sleeping in cliffs. I brought an ice axe walking stick. Well, we slept in like the field of dreams the first trip, huge areas. Well, this time we brought a super tarp and a mega tarp, and we needed bivvies and tarps and ice axes because Phil, I don't know if you saw that one photo. It was like a rock bed, like that we slept in. So we changed up gear a little bit. We dropped a lot of gear off. I got my pack weight down to 40-some pounds with camera gear, which was which was good, and it didn't hurt us in any way. Like dropping some of the gear, we still got the shelter set up and everything else, which was fine. But like long term, the big thing that I didn't drop weight on was food. Like, I went from having a 7-pound sleep system, 6.5 pound, to just bringing a tarp and basically just a ultra lightweight bivvy. Anyway, the one thing like we did is we basically just sat down and thought, okay, what do we absolutely need to survive, to be okay through rain, whatever else, and let's just get rid of anything possible that's frivolous, right? We'll share stoves and everything else like we'd always talked about. And then I took a lot different clothing on this trip, and I didn't bring quite as much. I didn't bring 2 sets of socks, which I normally do, just because I dried them out in my sleeping bag. Just little things like that. I only brought one thing of batteries for my phone. Little by little, we were able to cut quite a bit of weight, but we killed that thing basically the second day, and we had a lot of food left. So I'm looking, and I'm a tight ass. I'm like, man, I don't want to leave this food up here. So the only thing, I dumped out my some of my granola stuff I mixed up for the marmots. That's about all I left in there. But like, it was bad enough. Usually I purify my water. I was so thirsty, I was like pissed on it. I just drank straight out of everything. And Phil, he was pretty good about it. He still pumped his, but a couple of times, my that shit was brown, right? Like dirt coming out of it. I'm like, well, I'm justifying it. Like, they're like, you're a kid, you eat dirt all the time. That shit'll be. So I poured some Enduro in there and just downed it. And I'm like, I can feel it in my teeth, right? I'm like, it's pretty gritty, but it's a gritty bone. My teeth are pretty gritty. But yeah, it was a good trip. And with Phil, you could tell he learned a lot, not just about him. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I still don't know how he calculated the yardage.
He took the percentage. So at
like, where did he get his chart?
Where did he get that from? There's a program, Archer's Advantage or something like that.
Yeah.
That has a cut chart, and at a 45-degree slope, he was cutting 30% off of the total distance. So he basically at
And so
45 yards.
So bow mode on your GPS on your rangefinder doesn't do this.
So when it's past a certain distance and past a certain angle, it starts to fall behind a little bit. And what we've noticed is like a 37-degree angle at 7 yards, you're going to be a yard and a half, 2 yards hot. You go to like 45 or 50-degree angle, you're going to be like 4 yards hot, which is the issue we had on the first trip. Well, this one, bow mode probably would have been fine at this shorter distance.
Yeah.
But if you know your cuts and you're fast in your head with it, like I automatically cut off bow mode because I've always cut off bow mode. So and it's a rough guess, but like if I range something at 68 yards and 45 degrees downhill, depending upon how everybody gaps their pins differently.
Yeah.
If it's 60, let's say it's 68 yards and it's downhill, I'm going to cut 3 yards more off. So then when you aim at an animal, you've got your two different pins. So are you going to put your 70 low or your 60 high, right? Mm-hmm. Well, for me, if it's 68 yards, I know that animal on bow mode at 68, 65, I'm probably going to smoke it roughly. So I'm probably going to put my 68-yard mark right on its heart because worst case scenario, I drill it in the heart. Most of the time I do that, I end up shooting it in the top of the lungs or mid-lung. Depending on steep angles. So what he did is he knew his cuts. He knew at, 20, 30, and 40-degree angles, 50-degree angles, he's just taken 10, 20, 30, whatever percent off. Right. And that's how where he got his cut. And so you figure 45 yards, 30%, 4 times 3 is 12, plus the 5 yards. So 13 and a half yards roughly is what you're supposed to cut.
Got it.
Yeah, and it was steep. We know, and obviously in 5 to 6 hours of hiking, we weren't talking a whole lot coming up because we were breathing too hard. You can talk up a storm going down; it keeps your mind off the pain. I wasn't winded; I was just in pain. So we were talking about, most people. I mean, what the hell do you do to practice a 50-degree slope off a building? Right? It's steep. There's not a whole lot of ways to get prepared for that. And the one thing too is like, unless you're willing to go the distance in a hunt like this, I think most people after that first trip, finding out what it took to get in there, probably they're not coming back. I've seen a lot of guys fold up in that unit we were hunting. So yeah, Phil did an amazing job, and for never really backpack hunting like that, he's a pretty damn tough guy. Like because he never bitched or complained or anything. Like I talk too much. Wake up in the morning, first thing. Hey, Phil, how you doing? Your legs hurt? You want to stretch? You need any Advil? Ibuprofen? What's going on, man? It makes him talk because I just always wound up, and he'd be like, "No, I'm good." That's all. I'm over there like chatty patty. But yeah, he was super fun to hunt with, and he knows. Usually, I'm the a-hole behind the knife, skinning it out, and yeah, he knew what he was doing. So I just sat there snapping photos, talking his leg off. So he got everything cut up. I helped cut up some of the meat and got it done. And then when we hiked out, he took the cape in the head and I took the meat. So ended up being an 8.5-year-old ram right around that. It'll probably dry out around 158. I think Pope and Young is 140. So it's well into Pope and Young. And I was just proud that like he's a trained to hunt national champion and shows like all that training does pay off. And then where, even talked about it, where it lacks. Like, I'm a big advocate of that 6 mile in, 6 mile out, 40 pounds on the way in, 80 to 100 on the way out, because that's where the rubber meets the flipping road. Like, that's where you find out who's got it. And it's a grind. And, you've made plenty of pack outs. That is the one thing, like Phil was like, dude, this just sucks. This blows. Like, it's a constant mental grind. And so either way, yeah, it was an interesting trip.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, 12 years, I think it took him to draw it.
I'm jealous. I'm not going to lie. I'm jealous. I want to do it before I get too much older.
I was going to say, I think you're in the good state for there's some pretty big rams in there. In that state, it just takes forever to draw them.
Yeah. Well, and it's, there's no points in Oregon for rams. So it's just, you just got to get lucky. But as a resident, there's a pretty good chance of, it's probably one of the best in the U.S. for residents.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Calvin Halliday, he guides out there a little bit. He's a buddy of mine.
Yep.
The Fargo guys in the Army. He guides out there a lot, and I think that's the one thing. Like, and I've hunted. Well, I haven't hunted. I've only hunted sheep once, as far as for bighorn, but I've went on a lot of hunts, and the like we talked about, trophy places, trophy hunting. This area, you lose some trophy quality, but it's a trophy place, and you'll never forget the hunt. So, I mean, I was just, from the photos, you can tell it's extreme, and which is right up my alley. And the fact he was able to kill an 8.5-year-old ram on a backpack hunt with 2 dudes and get it out, I mean, it's pretty epic when you really stop and think about it.
Absolutely, because when you really think about it, you think about some of the areas like right here where I live, where I could go shoot a ram. I could shoot a lot bigger ram than that, but there's no comparison in terms of how rugged and how difficult it is to achieve what Phil achieved, right? So absolutely, when you're looking at, to me, when you're talking trophy, you've really got to consider the all the context that goes around that. And trophy country, to me, has as much or more influence to me on how I see my achievement, how I see that animal, than does this actual size of the animal. If you go and shoot a giant bull in a unit that's flat, that has, just bull to cow ratio 50-50, there's just monsters everywhere and there's no hunting pressure, and you shoot a 400-inch bull, I'm pleased as punch. I'm happy for you. That doesn't, to me though, compare to like an eagle cap bull that reaches 320 that you take in the middle of the most gnarly place and canyon in the middle of nowhere. They're both experiences that are great, but the trophy has to be evaluated. It's personal, for every person. But for me, definitely the area you hunt in, and that has a lot to do with that I guess how I perceive that trophy, that achievement, that whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, as you know, I've helped out on different areas all over the U.S. and, Alaska and the territories and the Yukon a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with those hunts, but I was there when the governor's tag for Montana for bighorn, I think it went for 458,000. And,
jeez.
I think the world record right now, it's 209 or 219 for bighorn. Wow. I think it's 209. So, you do like the math, let's say, and like a rough deduction. I think the world record for mule deer is 219 for typical. So, you start kind of deducting, really, they do coincide pretty close with each other. So there's just a lot less. So if you look at like a mule deer that's 160 compared to the world record, so give it 165, or let's say an equivalent to a sheep. Phil basically went into an area with not very many rams on a do-it-yourself hunt on a tag, and he shot a 165-inch mule deer, roughly. If you're going to put things into perspective of what his ram scores, it's just there's no damn rams, right? There's just not like, you see mule deer everywhere in that unit, and just about any unit in Colorado. And that's the biggest thing is when you blow one of those out, a band of rams, it's not like, oh, let's hike over to this basin. It's like, we are screwed. We're hiking for a long ways. So, I mean, it was pretty cool to see him take it down. So
that's
it was an awesome experience. Yep. Couldn't happen to a better guy.
Well, dude, I think we kind of hit our mark a little bit. So,
Mother of pearl.
Yeah. Should we wrap this one up?
Yeah. I got Clint Whiting, I got to take a pee break, and then we'll knock another one out real quick.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Take it easy.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to the Gritty Bowmen.
Gritty Bowmen.